what we are going to be talking about today is andropause and how to deal with that and natural ways to support testosterone as it decreases over time. So what is andropause? Andropause is more accurately referred to as late onset hypogonadism. So really what this is a decrease in the production of testosterone. And this is something as opposed to early onset hypogonadism, which is something that happens in children, in boys, where they have late onset of puberty and things of that nature. That can happen, and that's typically what we would refer to as like primary hypogonadism or something like that. So this is characterized by a gradual decline in testosterone production that happens with age, and typically the symptoms that we see are things like reduced libido, decreases in energy, mood changes, decreased muscle mass, that kind of stuff. And unlike menopause, which involves a complete cessation of ovarian function, andropause involves this sort of more progressive decline in testosterone production, and it doesn't result in a complete loss of reproductive ability. Okay, so it's different from menopause primarily in that way. And we'll talk some more about the ways that it's different here in a second. So if we're looking at this table here, you can see that over here on the, let me get my little laser pointer here. Here we're looking at andropause, and over in this column, we're looking at menopause. So the onset for andropause in men typically starts sometime after the age of 30. And as I said, it's this slow progressive decline in testosterone that we often really don't notice. And this is sort of one of the main characteristics that differentiates it between menopause. With menopause, you have this sudden cessation of estrogen production somewhere between 45 and 55 years of age, and that results in these sharp drops in estrogen and progesterone, the sex hormones, essentially. So with women, that causes a complete sort of loss of reproductive ability. You have a decrease in menstruation, a cessation of menstruation. I mean, really, and marking the end of fertility. Now, with men, even though you have this decline in testosterone, you still retain the reproductive function well into old age. But there are symptoms that occur with this, and these things are typically fatigue, low libido, muscle loss, changes in mood, brain fog, increase in abdominal fat, losses in muscle mass. So a lot of people, because this is something that happens slowly over time, men typically just think, well, this is just a normal age-related change, and there's not really anything that we can do about it, okay? And this is why, another reason why it's not sort of given as much attention as menopause is. This is why somebody says to me, is that even a thing? They never even really heard of it. So, when we have these symptoms, they're usually just dismissed as a normal part of aging. And we don't really tie those to a decrease in testosterone production. So how is this diagnosed? We diagnose this mainly based on our symptoms and a confirmed loss of testosterone by doing blood tests. Whereas with menopause, this is really just based on the absence of menstruation for 12 consecutive months. So menopause is much easier to sort of determine when that starts and when that stops, because we're doing it based on the cessation of menstruation, which is very easy to sort of track. It's much different if we're to sort of track how testosterone is falling, because the only way you can know that is through a blood test. So let's talk about the role of testosterone in male health. So testosterone is key for muscle mass and strength. It's key for optimal metabolism and longevity. It's critically important for fat metabolism and body composition. The more muscle you have, that's really your largest disposer of calories. Muscle burns fat, prevents abdominal fat gain. So the more muscle you have, the higher your metabolism is going to be, and the better you're going to be at metabolizing fat. Testosterone helps with cognitive function and mood. It reduces brain fog, enhances motivation. It's also associated with things like aggression, and basically all the things that make a man is really a function of testosterone and how much testosterone you have. Energy and performance, it's vital for endurance, for recovery, just for overall productivity. It's critically, well, it's essential, direct impact on male reproductive health and libido. So let's talk a little bit about the rate of testosterone decline over time. So when we talk about testosterone, when you go get a blood test, there's really two things that you need to be looking at. You need to be looking at total testosterone, and you need to be looking at free testosterone. So total testosterone represents all the testosterone that's in your blood, floating around in the blood. Now, one of the things you need to understand is that not all of that testosterone is available to you. So some of that testosterone, in fact, most of that testosterone is bound to a protein called sex hormone binding globulin, SHBG. So if you've ever had a hormone panel blood test done, you probably would have seen SHBG on that panel. And the more SHBG you have, the more testosterone is going to be bound. And the bound testosterone is not really biologically active, meaning because that testosterone is bound to that protein, it's not available to the cell receptors. So testosterone can't bind and testosterone can't exert its function on those cells. Really, what's the more important number is free testosterone. And you can see from this slide, our total testosterone should be somewhere in the range of 300 to 1,000 nanograms per deciliter of blood. Now, one thing you should notice is that is a huge range, right? So that makes it sound like if I go into the doctor and I get a blood test, it makes you sort of believe that if your testosterone is anywhere between 300 and 1,000, you're going to be good to go. Okay. And that's not necessarily true. You will feel if you have a blood testosterone level of 350 and a blood test versus a blood testosterone level of 950, both of those are within the normal range. But most men are going to feel very, very differently if they have 950 nanograms per deciliter as compared to 350. Now, there's a huge amount of variability, as you can see, in that normal range. So one of the things that we try and do, ideally, is have that testosterone level be as high as possible. But really what's more important is our free testosterone. And our free testosterone is the biologically active portion of testosterone that's not bound to this SHBG. Free testosterone is available to enter the cells and activate what we call androgen receptors. And androgen receptors, androgens are things that basically make males males. So testosterone is an anabolic androgenic steroid hormone. So when we talk about anabolic steroids, there's a whole group of anabolic steroids, but really all of those are some type of derivative of testosterone. Testosterone is sort of the granddaddy of all of these things. And anabolic androgenic steroids exert two different effects. There's two primarily different effects. Anabolic effects, which are ones that help to build muscle, and androgenic effects, which are ones that develop primary sexual characteristics of males. So, if you're a female, for example, let's say you're a female bodybuilder and you're going to take high levels of testosterone, you're going to get anabolic effects. It's going to build muscle, but you're also going to get androgenic effects. You're going to grow more body hair. You're going to have a deepening of the voice. So this sort of demonstrates the role of what testosterone does to men. But you'll notice that free testosterone levels in the blood are much lower, 5 to 25 picograms per mil. And that only represents about 1 to 3% of the total testosterone in the blood. So this also is important because you may have high levels of total testosterone, but if a lot of it is bound, then all of that testosterone is not necessarily available to you. Where you can have another person who has lower levels of total testosterone, but if they also have very little of it that's bound, then that person then can have more testosterone available to the cells, and they won't experience symptoms of low testosterone. So if you go to the doctor and you're trying to get diagnosed for this, and they're only looking at total testosterone, that's not really giving you a complete picture. Okay, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But over here, you can see what happens to total testosterone and free testosterone over time. So total testosterone is going to decline at a rate of about 1 to 1.6% per year, whereas free testosterone is going to decline at a greater rate than that, 2 to 3% per year. Okay, so if we look at what that looks like here, on the left here, we're looking at total testosterone. Those are the green bars. And on the right here, we're looking at free testosterone. Those are the orange bars. And on the x-axis here, we're looking at age group. So you can see here that if you were looking at free testosterone and you were plotting this over time, you can see that there's a significant drop over time in this hormone. Whereas if somebody here is at 35 to 39 years old, they might have a free testosterone in the blood of about 16 picograms per mil. But by the time that person is 55 to 59, they might only have 12 picograms per mil. And remember, that might not seem like a big difference, 12 to 16, but when the normal range is 5 to 25, that could be a significant difference. You can definitely have symptoms at 12 picograms per mil where you wouldn't necessarily have them at 16 picograms per mil. So we can see that over time, you have a drop in testosterone that, because it's so slow and because it's sort of insidious, we don't really associate the symptoms of low testosterone with some singular event that caused those symptoms to happen. So, we sort of have this gradual decrease in libido, or a gradual decrease in energy, and a gradual increase in visceral fat, and a gradual decrease in muscle mass. So when we have changes that happen that slowly, it's hard to pinpoint a singular event that caused those things to happen. And as a result of that, we don't really consider decreases in testosterone as being the driver behind those negative changes. So what are some of the health consequences of andropause? A big one is increased body fat and loss of muscle. Remember, I said that testosterone is an anabolic hormone, meaning it builds muscle. It is the main difference between the muscle masses of men versus the muscle masses of women. During puberty, boys will have 1,000 times higher concentrations of testosterone in the blood than females do. Testosterone is produced in the testicles. And if you don't have testicles, you're not going to be able to produce nearly as much testosterone. And as a result of that, you're not going to have nearly the amount of muscle. So low testosterone leads to this progressive loss in muscle mass over time. It leads to an increase in body fat over time, particularly visceral fat. And that can lead to problems with metabolic health, type 2 diabetes risk, and things of that nature. So we have low testosterone as an independent predictor of insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, meaning even if you don't have obesity, and even if everything else might be in place in your world, if your testosterone is lower, that in and of itself puts you at a greater risk for insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes, okay? It also is a risk factor for higher cardiovascular mortality. Men with lower naturally circulating levels of testosterone have a higher risk of all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. Now, in the past, you may have heard things like, now don't get this confused with bodybuilders who are taking supra-physiological levels of testosterone. So remember, I showed that we said the normal testosterone levels are somewhere between 300 and 900 nanograms per deciliter of blood. A bodybuilder might be using testosterone, and that might get up to 2,000 or 2,500. Those are what we would call super physiological levels. And if you have testosterone at those high levels, then yeah, that's going to put you at increase for cardiovascular problems. And there's a whole host of other things that go along with that. So when we talk about things like testosterone replacement, like we will in a bit, we're not talking about those super physiological levels of testosterone. We're talking about keeping your testosterone levels within the normal range, preferably up towards the higher end of the normal. Depressive symptoms and cognitive decline. Testosterone deficiency is definitely linked to decreases in mood, may contribute to cognitive decline, brain fog, lack of energy. All those kinds of things are things that you just don't feel like yourself. You say, I don't feel like I did when I was younger. When I was younger, I could do this, I could do this, I could do X, Y, Z, and now I just can't do it anymore. That's largely because of decreases in testosterone. It also can cause reduced bone density and fracture risk. Testosterone deficiency accelerates bone loss and increases the risk of osteoporosis. So it's a critically important hormone for maintaining a lot of different factors when it comes to your overall health. So what are some of the causes of low testosterone? The causes of low testosterone can essentially be broken into modifiable causes, or I should say, things that you can modify and things that you can't modify. Okay, and there are more things that you can modify than things that you can't. So the modifiable things that we're going to talk about today are diet, stress, exercise, and sleep. These are the things that you really have the most control of that have the greatest impact on testosterone levels. Now, there are also these metabolic modifiable things like insulin resistance, metabolic syndrome, inflammation. These things are largely a function of your diet, your stress, your exercise, and your sleep. So, these things over here are not necessarily things that you modify directly. These are things that change indirectly when you change these things over here, your diet, exercise, and your sleep and your stress. And then we have environmental things like exposure to things in the environment, toxins and other endocrine disruptors. There's evidence that like compounds in plastics, like if you heat plastic dishes in the microwave, that could release things into your food that when you then go and eat that, those endocrine disruptors can mess with testosterone production. Those would be those kinds of things that are modifiable to a lesser extent than these main other ones. And then finally, the non-modifiable things are simply the age-related decline in testosterone. So even if you do all of these other things right, even if you exercise regularly, even if your diet's in check, you sleep well, you have a low stress life, you are still eventually going to have a decline in testosterone. But what we want to do through our lifestyle modification is try and delay that age-related decline for as long as possible. That's really what our goal is. So let's talk now about when is testosterone replacement therapy warranted. Now, there's a new trend now. Now, you may have heard more about testosterone replacement therapy over the last probably 20 years. It's become much more popular. But what we're hearing now more is a method called testosterone optimization therapy. So this would be testosterone replacement would basically be your testosterone levels are below 300. You're not producing enough testosterone. Let's replace some of that. Testosterone optimization is, well, let's say your testosterone is 350, which technically it's still in the normal range, but you would probably feel a lot better if it was 750. So let's give you some testosterone to increase that so that you're as close to the maximum level within the normal range as possible. That's testosterone optimization therapy. We're not really going to talk about that today. We're going to talk about mainly testosterone replacement. So when is it warranted? So if you have consistent symptoms of hypogonadism, which would be things like we've been talking about, fatigue, low libido, erectile dysfunction, depression, muscle mass loss, increased visceral fat, poor recovery from exercise, lethargic all the time, if you're tired all the time, if you have cognitive issues, you can't think straight, brain fog, those kinds of things. Those are all symptoms of andropause. And they persist. These are things that would sort of show up, and you have them more than you don't. A biochemically confirmed low testosterone would be, again, under 300 nanograms per deciliter on 2 separate occasions, 2 separate morning tests. Now, I will tell you, if you go to a doctor and you're going to get your testosterone measured, they're not going to have you do it twice to measure this. They're basically going to measure it once. And if it's low, you'll probably get treated. If it's not low, they'll probably send you on your way. Now, there are doctors who specialize in testosterone replacement as opposed to just your standard endocrinologists. Many endocrinologists will just look at the number. And if your testosterone is over 300, they'll say you're fine, even if you have all these other symptoms. So it's like anything else. With any other doctor, you sort of have to shop around to find one that really understands testosterone or really understands andropause. And ideally, as I said, you want to measure this with free testosterone, because free testosterone is really the one that's more important, because that's the biological available testosterone that is actually exerting effects when it binds to a cell. And also ruling out reversible causes. And these are some of the things we're going to talk about today. So obesity, poor sleep, the effects of certain medications like opioids, high stress, nutrient deficiencies, all of these things can cause low testosterone. So, if you don't eat right, if you don't exercise, if you have high visceral fat, you have a high stress job, you hardly ever sleep, and your testosterone is low, you really should get those things taken care of before you go to the doctor and just decide you're going to go on testosterone replacement, okay? Because these are the things that you really need to try and correct over time, because these are the causes of the low testosterone. You don't want to just go treat the symptom without getting to the root cause of why the testosterone is low in the first place. So this is what we're going to talk about today, and how we sort of optimize these things before we make that jump to actual testosterone replacement. The other thing is you want to make sure there's no contraindication. So you should not be using testosterone supplementation if you have prostate or breast cancer. And yes, men can get breast cancer. Severe sleep apnea that's not treated, uncontrolled heart failure, or an elevated hematocrit. So a hematocrit is basically how much red blood cells do you have in your blood. And the more red blood cells you have, the thicker the blood becomes. And when you use testosterone, the hematocrit tends to increase. So if you already have, and the problem with having a high hematocrit is the viscosity of the blood goes up, the blood gets harder to pump, the blood gets thick, and that can cause clots and things like that. So if you have an elevated hematocrit to begin with, taking testosterone can potentially make that worse. Now, that can be addressed simply by donating blood every couple months. And this is one of the things that's often very common with testosterone replacement, where they'll give you exogenous testosterone, and then you'll have an elevated hematocrit as a result of that. And then what they'll give you is what's called therapeutic phlebotomy, where they will write you a prescription to actually go donate blood. So it's an easily manageable sort of side effect. Okay, so let's get to what we're here for: natural ways to support testosterone. The first one, and this is really a big one, is through exercise. And we'll talk about what specific exercises are the best, and which ones can potentially not be so great for supporting testosterone. Stress management is critically important, because high stress releases a hormone called cortisol. And whereas testosterone is an anabolic steroid, cortisol is a catabolic steroid. Cortisol breaks down tissue. So, for example, you might have, let's say you have a bad knee or a bad shoulder, and you get a cortisone shot in the shoulder. Well, what's that doing? That cortisone is going into that shoulder joint. It's finding the inflamed cells, and it's breaking them down. The problem with cortisol is it breaks down everything. So if you have high circulating levels of cortisol, it's not only going to break down the bad stuff, it's also going to break down the good stuff. So, if you wake up every day and the first thing you do is get in the car and you are in a high pressure, high traffic situation every day going to work, you have a high stress job, you're getting home and you're slugging through traffic again, odds are your cortisol levels are high all day long, chronically over time. That is terrible for muscle mass. It's terrible for cardiovascular function, insulin resistance. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. So stress management is critically important. A key fact in stress management is sleep. If you're stressed out all the time, you're probably not sleeping very well. Sleep is critically important for allowing for optimal hormone production. We'll talk more about that here in a second. And then finally, nutrition and supplementation. Nutrition and supplementation really are sort of the raw materials that you need for hormone production. So let's talk about exercise first and what kind of exercises are most effective for elevating testosterone. So over here, the first column here, we have the acute testosterone response, and then we have the chronic testosterone response. So if we look at something like resistance training, which would be conventional weight training where we're lifting relatively high loads at relatively high volumes, the acute response there is a moderate to high increase in testosterone immediately after the training. So you do the training, like if you measured your testosterone, did a 1 hour workout of weight training and measured the testosterone again, it would be higher, okay? That's what happens as a result of resistance training. Now, over time, that can potentially lead to a slight increase in your overall testosterone level. So this is really what's best for long-term testosterone support and increasing your muscle mass. This is really the type of exercise that we want to promote if we're interested in overall testosterone health. Second thing we'll talk about is high-intensity interval training. And imagine, if you don't know what high-intensity interval training is, it's something like, let's say you're going to get on a bike, a stationary cycle, and you're going to pedal as hard as you can for a minute, and then you're going to take 30 seconds rest. And then you're going to pedal as hard as you can for a minute and take 30-second rest. Okay, that would be a 2-to-1 work to rest ratio. And let's say you're going to do that for 10 reps. That would be high-intensity interval training. Now, you might do that as, let's say you're doing that because you want to lose fat and that burns a lot of calories, and it does. The advantage to doing that over doing regular steady state cardio, which is what we have here, is really the effect on testosterone. So high intensity interval training has a moderate effect on increasing testosterone acutely. And with resistance training, you have the same sort of, you have either no change in testosterone or you have a slight change in testosterone over time. And this response is superior to steady state cardio. Now, the effects on fat loss may not be superior to steady state cardio. Okay, but the effects on testosterone levels are. And we'll talk here in a second about why that is. So with steady state cardio, you can see that the acute response here is you have this low increase in testosterone acutely. And it doesn't stay elevated. It goes up and it goes right back down. So if you do this all the time, you have the potential to actually cause a decrease in testosterone over time. Okay, so when we have these long exercise sessions, let's say you're going to get on a bike and you're going to exercise at a heart rate of 150 for 45 minutes, for example. That's a long exercise session where you're going to burn a lot of fat during that type of activity, but you have to understand essentially why the body reacts the way it does in response to exercise. So whenever you do any type of exercise, no matter what it is, the body is going to sort of interpret that exercise and say, how can I adapt so that that exercise becomes easier the next time I do it? Okay. Now, if I do resistance training and I'm lifting a heavy load, the body's going to say, well, how can I make that easier next time? Well, I give myself more muscle. If I build more muscle, that load now feels lighter. It's easier to do. It's less fatiguing. Okay, that's a natural adaptation. But if I'm running down the road and I'm doing cardiovascular exercise, the body's going to say, how can I make that exercise easier the next time I do it? Well, do I need to have a lot of upper body muscle when I'm running down the road? No, I don't. So the body's going to say, well, let's decrease our testosterone production so we can lose some of our muscle, so we can make the person lighter so that we burn fewer calories and make it easier to run down the road. Okay, so it's a perfectly normal adaptation to those different kinds of exercise. But with one of those types of exercise, it lends itself to testosterone production, and the other type of exercise lends itself to testosterone decrement. Okay, and if we want to increase our testosterone, clearly we want the one that's going to lead to larger testosterone release, and that's going to be weight training. And if we do excessive endurance training, let's say we're doing this every day, where we're going out, where we're going to run on a treadmill for an hour every day, this is going to lead to decreases in testosterone acutely. It's probably going to lead to decreases in testosterone chronically. And this is linked to high cortisol and HPG suppression. So what that is that's the hypothalamic pituitary gonadotropin gonadal axis. And essentially what that is the hypothalamus in the brain releases a hormone that tells the pituitary in the brain to release another hormone to go to the gonads and produce testosterone. So that's the HPG axis. That axis is suppressed with high levels of endurance training and high cortisol circulating levels through the blood, which is generally a common occurrence with these type of long, sort of excessive endurance workouts. So in short, resistance training is really the type of activity that we want. So when it comes to supporting our exercise, I've chosen some products here that I think are really good for supporting performance, for supporting recovery, and sort of the anabolic response to exercise. When you are doing resistance exercise, you need to have increased protein intake. There's no doubt about it. So what I've put here is the NeoLife shake. This is an excellent meal nutritional shake. Includes 18 grams of protein if you mix it in water. It helps to preserve lean mass, helps support normal post-exercise blood sugar. I mean, I personally take 3 scoops of NeoLife shake. I mix it in 20 ounces of skim milk, and that gives me roughly somewhere around 45 grams of protein. And I do this as basically as a pre-workout or a post-workout. Performance protein is a little different from the NeoLife shake in that it's exclusively a whey protein. The NeoLife shake is a blend of whey, casein, and soy. There's no soy in the performance protein. Some people are sensitive to soy. And there is some evidence that if you have excessive amounts of soy, that could have a potentially estrogen mimicking effect. And that's more, some people are more sensitive to that than others. So if you're somebody who wants to avoid soy, the performance protein would be a better option. Now, if you're eating some soy, you can eat soy every day. You really need to be eating excessive amounts of it to have these estrogenic effects. So don't get all freaked out about eating soy. I don't want to put fear into anybody about eating soy. But anyway, that's one of the differences. There's also some slight differences in the carbohydrate. But whey is a really fast absorbing protein, which is what makes it really good for getting protein into the muscles following a workout. Upbeat is essentially a product that increases blood flow to muscle during exercise. And when you increase blood flow to muscle, you increase oxygen delivery to muscle. And when you increase oxygen delivery to muscle, you increase that muscle's work capacity. So Upbeat is an excellent pre-workout. I personally take Upbeat. I mix it with Elevate. And I actually throw a scoop of creatine in there. And that's what I use as my pre-workout. So those, I think, are great options for improving exercise support. As far as sleep, these products promote deep restorative sleep, which is required for optimal hormone production. Magnesium has been shown to enhance the depth of sleep and helps muscle relaxation. Vitamin D supports healthy sleep, and herbal rest and relax helps calm the nervous system and supports sleep. So here, what we're trying to do is maximize the beneficial effect of deep sleep, because again, that's really what is critical for optimal hormone production and for keeping cortisol levels low as well. Stress support, these are products that protect testosterone by buffering the stress response. Remember, we said that um, high cortisol is one of the worst things that you could have if your goal is to keep testosterone levels healthy at a healthy level. So Tray provides antioxidants to help from free radicals and reduce oxidative stress. Super B supports adrenal resilience. The adrenal glands are where cortisol is produced. So this helps there. And then magnesium helps maintain healthy cortisol levels and helps calm the nervous system by keeping those things in check. That also helps with sleep as well. So there's a close relationship between stress and sleep. So it's important to keep that in mind. And finally, we have our nutritional support. And these are just things that I threw in there that I think are important for providing the essential raw materials for optimal hormone synthesis and protection of the cells. Pro Vitality is always going to be a great product. Generally, anytime I do one of these webinars, I'm talking about Pro Vitality, no matter what I'm talking about, just because it's such a great product. And that's really because it's more than one. There's 4 products in there, but this provides omega-3s and carotenoids, vitamins, minerals, grain concentrates for cellular health. Then you have the masculine herbal complex, which is really botanical support for male hormonal health and virility. Zinc is directly involved in testosterone synthesis and sperm production. And then vitamin E protects hormone-producing cells, again, from oxidative stress, from free radical damage. So these are really the I think, critical things. Now, obviously, we offer a lot more nutritional products, but I think if I was producing sort of a testosterone bundle, this is what I would include in that. So really what we're looking at when we're talking about the NeoLife Advantage is a comprehensive lifestyle-based approach to testosterone support. And this is, even if you're somebody who is using testosterone therapy, these are still things that you should take along with that to address these issues, the issues of, if I have a high stress in my life, just taking testosterone is not going to remove that stress. I still need to have the nutritional factors in place and the lifestyle factors in place that are going to optimize my testosterone levels. So from an exercise perspective, we're talking about primarily resistance training with the NeoLife Shake and or the Performance Protein and Upbeat. To optimize the nightly hormone release during sleep, we're looking at something like the Vegan D, the Herbal Rest and Relax, and the Magnesium Complex. Along with that, sleep and stress go together. We want to support healthy cortisol levels, fight oxidative damage and free radicals. Tray, Super B, and again, the Magnesium Complex are great products for that. And then the foundational hormonal support from a nutritional perspective we would get from Pro Vitality, the chelated zinc, vitamin E+, and the masculine herbal complex. So when we talk about why NeoLife, as usual, I'm always going to say that we use science-based formulas and we use whole food derived ingredients whenever possible. We will have bioactive nutrients in there as well. But really, whenever we're making products, we always lean towards food-derived sources first. And this is something that most companies do not do. This requires a lot more money, frankly, to produce products this way than to produce them just using purely synthetic ingredients whenever possible. So NeoLife avoids this whenever we can. And these products are also designed to support the interconnected systems that regulate testosterone, like stress and sleep, for example, is a perfect example. It's really hard to have really restful, deep sleep when you're stressed out all day long, right? Those things generally go together. You need to have one without the other. So when you look at the NeoLife product line, we look at this from sort of a synergistic effect. Which products do we take and which combinations in order to address all of these issues as best as we possibly can? And finally, we're focused on health span, not just hormone level. So think about that doctor when you go in and you say, Doc, I'm losing muscle mass, I'm gaining fat, I can't sleep, I'm stressed all the time, my libido's in the tank, I have erectile dysfunction, I don't know what's going on. And they say, well, your testosterone's 400, so that's not the problem. That's somebody who's solely focusing on the numbers and not really looking at the symptoms and the overall health of the individual. So with NeoLife, we're focused on the overall health of the individual, and we try and get all of these things that we have control over, the modifiable risk factors that lead to decreases in testosterone. These are the things that we are trying to optimize before we take that jump to testosterone replacement therapy. So I hope you found this helpful. Again, andropause definitely is a thing. And if you're in your 40s, 50s, you're probably experiencing some bit of that. So hopefully you found this helpful.